helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformation with Michael Hart, award-winning psychotherapist, author, and Canadian certified counselor.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Life Transformation Show. I'm your co-host, Denise Hart, and with me is psychotherapist Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services and author of the Transformed Life book on Amazon. So today we're exploring a sobering but deeply relevant topic, the Death Cult of Molech, modern day idols that harm our children. So although the idol Molech is in biblical time, the spirit of Molech is still around. You know, that willingness to sacrifice the next generation for personal gain continues in hidden forms. So Michael will be drawing some parallels between the ancient worship of Molech and modern day treatment of children. But before we get there, if you're new to this show or need counseling support, you can find us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914. So Michael, thank you for joining me in studio. And this topic sounds very interesting. So why don't you begin by telling us about the worship of Molech in the Old Testament?
That's such a good place for us to start, Denise. And it's so good to be back in studio to do another show. And I think this show is going to be a very interesting one. Many of our listeners may not be familiar with the term Molech or the idol Molech. So that's a very good question for us to start with. Molech was a pagan deity associated with the Ammonites. The Ammonites were a people that were descendant from Lot's younger daughter after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So worshippers believed that Molech could grant prosperity, success, and protection, but only through the most horrific price imaginable, the sacrifice of their own children. Children were sacrificed in order to bring about the blessings on their crops and their cattle. So in Leviticus 18:21, God issues a chilling and direct command when he said to the Israelites who had taken over the Ammonites' practice of sacrificing their children, God said, "Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." Similarly, in Jeremiah 7 verse 31, God says, "They have built the high places of Tophet." This is a place where Molech was worshipped, to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I did not command, nor did it even enter my mind. This act was so barbaric that God said the thought that children could be sacrificed didn't even enter his mind. The tragedy here, though, is that this wasn't happening in some pagan land. This was happening among God's own people. Israel, chosen to be the light of the nations, had been seduced by the false promise that sacrificing their children could secure their future. And this is really sad, because these people who God made so many promises of blessing to were now thinking that in order for us to be blessed, we need to offer our children up as sacrifice to the god Molech. Spiritually, Molech represented the idolatry of gain at the cost of innocence. But psychologically, we might call it the moral disintegration of empathy, when the drive for prosperity, approval, or control overrides the instinct to protect the vulnerable in society. And in that society, the lives of children were disposable for gain. Children were seen as disposable items that could be destroyed in the pursuit of success. In other words, the lives of children back then were not considered to be as valuable as the lives of their parents.
Oh, that's such a disturbing image, Michael. You know, parents offering up their children to be burned alive? It's unimaginable. But it's also heartbreaking that this wasn't just an ancient pagan custom. God's own people got caught up in it.
Yes, but I think before we point our fingers at these ancient societies, let us ask ourselves a couple of self-searching questions. The first question is, as a society, do we place the same value on the life of a child, including the unborn child, that we place on the lives of adults? And the next question is, as a society, do we treat children as disposable entities that sometimes stand in the way of success? I want us to consider those questions because as we go through the show today, unfortunately, we will be seeing that as modern day societies, we are doing some of the very same things that the Ammonites were doing and that the children of Israel were doing back then. So as we go through, we are going to be looking at frightening parallels between the sacrifice of children to the god Molech and practices in our day that, as Denise said in the introduction, shows that the spirit of Molech is alive and well, and that this death cult of ancient time is still operating in societies in hidden way today.
That's so true, Michael. It's such sobering realization, though, that this was so widespread in the Jewish society that even King Solomon in 1 Kings 11:7 was building altars to Molech. So, Michael, let's go right into the discussion of the first parallel. What do you see as a parallel between the sacrifice of children to Molech and what we see happening in families today?
I think that there is a spiritual blindness that overtake people and let them think that what they're doing, the evil that they're doing, is actually good. And I think a lot of evil that is being done today is done in the name of progressiveness, that we have become more civilized and we have better ways of doing things than the commandments that God gave to us in the first place. And when this happens, society begins to disintegrate. Society, the morals in society begins to break down. And for people to do evil things the way that they did back then, they have to come up with a way to justify the evil that they're doing to make it seem as if it is good. Does that sound familiar to any of you today, that there are things that we're doing to our children that are evil, that people actually come up with way to justify that it's right to do that to children? Psychologically, what's happening is something that Albert Bandura described as moral disengagement. And it's when people justify harmful actions by redefining them as normal or necessary. That was exactly what the Israelites did. They were sacrificing their children because they needed better crops to feed their families and to prosper as a society. They looked at the nations around and they saw the nations prospering, and they said to themselves, maybe if we offer our children up a sacrifice, we too will prosper. So today we see this in the form of parents who say, I am giving my children the freedom to make their own decisions. And this freedom that we're giving our children to make their own decision at very young ages, when they are not capable of making those kinds of decisions, leads to children making decisions that bring harm to them physically and emotionally. And many of these children, because of those decisions, they become suicidal. And many of them, unfortunately, have fallen prey to the god Molech because they have taken their own lives. So these parents have become victims of the death cult Molech that says this is the pathway to more success. This is the pathway to a progressive society. However, a society in which parents ceases to parent their children will not lead to true prosperity, but to moral decay and to the destruction of the future generation. This is how the spirit of Molech hides. It disguises itself in good intentions. In the same way that these ancient parents believed that they were ensuring prosperity by sacrificing their children, today many parents believe that they are giving their children a better future, a more progressive future, better morality, not realizing that they're actually destroying their children. They're burning away relationship. They're burning away the potential of the next generation, and the innocence of these children are being destroyed in the name of progress.
Powerfully said, Michael, but really heartbreaking. It really makes me think of how we as a culture have redefined success. We call it progress, but in many ways it's regression. This is why in Romans 12, verse 2, it says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind." Michael, what other parallel do you see between society today and the worship of Molech, where people sacrifice their children to the idol of prosperity?
Yes, I see today that many parents, the second thing I see that parents are seeking prosperity at the expense of their children. I hear many parents will say things like in counseling, like, I am doing it for the kids. And we see that what they're doing for the kids is leading to this dysfunction and disintegration in the family system. So when parents put money above the children, money can buy extracurricular activities, it can buy vacations or college tuition, but it can't replace bedtime prayers, shared laughters, or the security of being truly seen and loved. So many parents who say, I'm doing this for the kids, I am working 3-4 jobs for the kids, or I am not seeing my kids because I have to take this big position in another country. What is actually happening is that they are sacrificing the well-being of their children for financial gain. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus said it this way: you cannot serve God and money. Yet so many households do just that. Not out of malice, but out of a misunderstanding. Parents actually believe and convince themselves that success and wealth will secure their children's future. Well, when what is happening is that many of these children are ending up depressed, they're ending up anxious, they're ending up with all kinds of mental health issues, they're ending up suicidal because they have been sacrificed for financial gain. A research by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth show that the child's emotional security and the attachment that they have to parental figures are very important for how that child will function later on in society. And when that connection is missing, children often grow up battling anxiety, depression, suicidality, addiction, and many other mental health issues. money cannot replace the bonding that children need to grow up as secure adults. And so many of us, sadly, this next parallel, Denise, in a nutshell, is that many of us have sacrificed our children to Molech because we believe that if we spend time prospering financially, it will make the children better. But it's actually destroying the children.
We will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist and author Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services has been speaking on the topic, the Death Cult of Molech, modern-day idols that harm our children. You can find out more about us at elimcounsellingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914. Please consider making a donation through elimmentalhealthfoundation.com. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. So, Michael, before we break, what you are saying is that just like the Israelites and the Amorites of ancient times, we are putting the pursuit of wealth before the well-being of our children. We may not be throwing them in fires, but nevertheless, we are harming them in other ways. So, what is another parallel you see between the worship of Molech and modern-day parents?
One of the other parallels that I see is the sacrifice of children for parents' pleasure and convenience. And this is different than just parents or pursuing success. Now we're talking about pleasure and convenience. So in the ancient world, people sacrificed children to secure comfort as well. Success or favor from the gods, but comfort was one of the things that they were seeking. And today it looks a little different, but the spirit behind it is the same. So we may not be literally sacrificing children in fire, but many parents place their children, in a sense, sacrifice their children, in a sense, I should say, for their own sense of security and comfort. I wonder how many children have been placed in harm's way because parents were more focused on what's convenient for them. I wonder how many children do not exist today because it was not convenient for them to come into existence. So we live in what psychologists call a comfort culture. And everything is designed to make life easier, faster, and more pleasurable. But the cost is that we have no tolerance for discomfort, even the kind of discomfort that can help us grow. And so parents in modern day society often sacrifice their children on the altar of self-interest and comfort. Parents too are so busy with their own pursuits of pleasure that they have no time to connect or bond with their children. And many parents give their children to screens to keep them quiet while they enjoy comfort and indulge in their self-interest. And one parent admits that the tablet is the only thing that can keep them quiet while I get to enjoy the things that I like. And so the problem is that while the screen may offer us a piece of mind in the moment, it slowly erodes the relationship with the child over time, and the child well-being is being sacrificed for personal comfort. There have been many studies that have been done that shows that screen time is detrimental for children. In a review article titled Effects of Excessive Screen Time on Child Development in 2023, it finds that heavy reliance on screen media may harm children's cognitive, linguistic, and social and emotional growth. And another study showed that preschool age children, a study of preschool age children found that longer hours of screen time were correlated, negatively associated with children's health development. So, in other words, the more screen time, the less healthy the development of the child. So while many of us have sacrificed our children to the screen to keep them quiet so that we might have more comfort and easier life, we are in fact doing things that are detrimental, as these studies say, to our children's development. So Denise, I see this as another way in which we are sacrificing the well-being of our children today in the same way, in a similar way that the Israelites and the Ammonites did in the past. It might not be throwing them in the fire, but it's throwing them over to the screen and to technology in a way that really gives us the kind of comfort that we need. So we are placing our comfort ahead of the children's well-being.
Oh, that's sobering, Michael. And I'm sure that the parents are not deliberately doing this, but in trying to keep the peace, we end up silencing the very connections our children need most. Proverbs 22:6. It's a great reminder to parents. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So, listeners, remember that you can't train or guide a child you are not connected to.
Yes, and as a culture, we have allowed the priests of our age, the gods of our age, who are the marketers and the social media influencers, they are the new cult leaders who are teaching our children and leading our children away. And so these new priests of the modern day age, they are like the priests of Molech in the Old Testament days. They are promising something to our children in the forms of these entertainment and these games that is actually destroying these children. So they preach that, these children are being entertained and that they're enjoying themselves, but the truth is that they're destroyed. So the modern Molech doesn't stand in a temple. The modern Molech hides in glowing screens and in endless entertainment. And this endless entertainment, this new spirit of Molech that's hiding behind these screens, are drawing both adults and children away from the truth and discipline and is destroying the next generation.
Truthfully said, Michael. So earlier you spoke about how the modern spirit of Molech often shows up through the pursuit of wealth and material success. But it seems that there are other kinds of altars too, some more subtle ones. What are some of the other altars on which modern day parents and families sacrifice their children?
That's such a good question. Another one of the most deceptive modern altars is the altar of performance and achievement. Now, it doesn't always look evil. In fact, it often looks like it's the responsible thing to do. It's teaching discipline or it's promoting excellence. But beneath it is the same old spirit that says to children, you are not worthy enough. You are not good enough as you are. So as a psychotherapist, I see this every week. Parents who love their kids deeply still find themselves trapped by the lie that their value and their children's value comes from performance. They push harder. They work longer. I once spoke with a father who wept in my office saying, I have given my son everything I never had. Private schools, hockey camps, all the opportunities. but he barely looks at me in the eye anymore. And that's the tragedy of the altar of performance. We can gain the world and lose the heart of those we love. We can push our children to perform, and we get them in all kind of performance related activities, but we are sacrificing relationships with them. There are some children who are sacrificed in this altar of performance where they're given impossible standards that they can never meet. Because you see, to the parents who are trying to live their lives through their kids and to have their kids succeed at any cost, a 9 to 5 is not good enough. I had a young man who told me some time ago that he came home with a 95% mark, and his father said to him, "Where is the other 5%? Now you can just see that this young man is being pushed to a standard that is unattainable. And so this kind of altar in which we sacrifice children, where we are pushing them to perform in ways that do not take their personal well-being into consideration, can be detrimental for the child's future. It makes no sense for your children to be getting straight A's if they're falling apart emotionally and stressed out because they're working too hard. It makes no sense for them to be pushed to get straight A's when they can't relate to people socially because they're never allowed to play with their peers. It makes no sense for them to get straight A's when they can't work in a team because all they do is study from day to night. It makes no sense because these children, in essence, are being sacrificed for performance and achievement.
So, Michael, that was such an eye-opening and sobering conversation. We have come to the end of this episode, and I know you have much more to say. So we'll continue with part 2, where we'll focus on how to protect our children from the spirit of Molech. So if this episode blessed you today, we encourage you to share it with someone. You can replay this and other episodes on Elim Counseling Services YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us today. And if you're walking through a difficult season or want support for your family, you can learn more about our counseling services at elimcounselingministry.com. Listeners, we would love to hear from you. So if you have a question or a comment, please contact us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, this is your co-host, Denise Hart.
And Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services. And we're praying together that God would bless you in all your relationships and to keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.